Back in 1982, this is a really sad story, actually. 7 people died because Tylenol, they didn't put those, when you buy a bottle of Tylenol, it has a lot number on it. And it has a sealed thing on when you open it up, and it has a childproof and all those different mechanisms to insulate the public from the product. Well, they didn't have that prior to 1982. And some crazy person decided to tamper with some of the Tylenol bottles with cyanide.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Product traceability is extremely complex to implement. If it is mandated by the regulations, you might not have much of a choice. But to shoulder the administration burden imposed by traceability processes, it could be so challenging that it might break your processes while inputting serial numbers during your receive operation. There is also a very thin line in deciding between lot numbers and serial numbers. Finally, the recall management might require you to have the infrastructure set up for the entire recall process. In today's episode, we invited a panel of cross-functional experts for a live interview on LinkedIn who brings significant expertise to discuss product traceability and recall management best practices. We discussed the nuances associated with deciding between when to use the lot versus serial numbers. Finally, we covered many stories related to product traceability and recall management from several industries. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you're joining for the first time, this is part of our digital transformation series, for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to digital transformation. And for today, we have a very important topic, which is called product traceability. Some people also call it as lot serial number traceability. So that's what we are going to be doing today. And before we do that, we are going to start with everybody's intros. If you don't know me, I am Sam Gupta, your host and principal at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. On that note, I am going to move to Chris for his intro.
Thanks, Sam. Chris Gherardini, the owner and CEO of Turnkey Technologies. We're a 28-plus year Microsoft Dynamics implementation partner. So I've been implementing ERP since the early days, as we'll say, but looking forward to the conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Chris. Abu, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Sure. My name is Abu. I lead the group here at Pennies. We are a Sage X3 partner, so we provide solutions in the food and beverage, cannabis manufacturing. So traceability is an important requirement in all those industries, and looking forward to.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Abu. Tom, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Sure, Sam. Thank you. And good to see you guys. My name is Tom Rodden. I am a IT executive, longtime IT career guy, 20 plus years now, and most recently CIO at Varian Medical Systems, currently consulting on large ERP programs. And in a prior life, I was also running business operations prior to my IT career. I was at GE doing logistics and manufacturing. And so I have been involved in some recall discussions and activities, both from an operations point of view as well from an IT point of view. So to Sam's point, this is a critically important topic for many companies in many industries, and happy to be talking about it today.
And hopefully we can discuss some of those real life stories. Thank you so much for being here, Tom. Andy, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me, Sam. My name's Andy Pratico. I've been involved with ERP software for small to mid-sized manufacturers for over 40 years. So I make Cristiano seem like a rookie. But anyways, I'm in Vancouver, Canada, Vancouver, British Columbia. I worked with manufacturers all over North America. I lived in the U.S. for 11 years. And when I lived in the U.S., my specialty was aerospace and defense contractors. So speaking about traceability, or what they call cradle to grave traceability, that's very, very critical in highly regulatory type manufacturing companies. Thank you.
Okay, and with your charm, Andy, you are probably going to make everyone look rookie. So thank you so much for being here, Chuck. Chuck, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Sam. Chuck Hockstead. I am a longtime manufacturing professional. I am Director of Sales and Marketing for Turnkey Technologies. And this traceability topic is near and dear to my heart with all the years in nuclear manufacturing, Navy nuclear manufacturing, and defense electronics.
So hopefully we can have some stories there between your nuclear versus automotive. I think we are going to have a lot of fun. Thank you so much for being here, Chuck. All right, guys. So if you're joining for the first time and in the audience, make sure you guys post your questions and comments, because I don't have a ton of questions. So I rely on your questions to be able to ask on this panel. And we typically try to cover them during the show. If you run out of time, we'll make sure that you're going to receive your answers. On that note, I am going to start with the first question. And maybe Chris, you can start in setting the stage overall from the product traceability perspective. And I have seen all sorts of scenarios. And some of those were, in some cases, you require traceability, which is going to be obviously mandated by some of these regulatory organizations. And you don't necessarily have a choice but to implement those. Sometimes they are going to be clear in terms of what kind of traceability they are looking for. Sometimes it's sort of going to be gray that, okay, this is the kind of traceability, but in other cases, when you are doing product traceability for internal operations, for example, warranty, etc., it becomes very tricky to decide between serial number, lot numbers. It could be all over the place. So I have seen, things getting mixed up. So maybe you want to set the stage a little bit in terms of what is traceability and how anybody should be.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. And so, I can talk on a number of points, but let me just get started. So traceability by industry. So we're going to have differences and requirements by industry. I've heard we mentioned, defense, and I'm not going to talk about defense. You guys can do that. But in personal experiences and projects, food and medical devices, a couple that I can talk about. And, in the food context, it's going to be typically lots. Again, there could be some serialization in totes and other containers if you're tracking that, but typically you're looking at consumption of lots into larger lots of finished goods, and it could be a hierarchy where I'm consuming lots of spices, a spice blend into a mix and on up. And again, the capture of the lots from the initial purchase receipt. And sometimes there's specific information that travels with a lot. There could be expiration dates. There's a lot of details around that may be necessary. In the metal space, you may get heat information related to it. But in the food space, lots, expiration, things of that nature. And again, the challenge of the ERP is number one is to capture at the point of receipt. And then at the point where we're doing manufacturing is to accurately capture the lot being used into the next stage of the process. And again, if the ERP systems are custom well, then you have the ability to come back after the fact and search for a lot number or a serial, whether it's sitting in inventory and it was bought as a finished good serialized, or if it was buried and consumed way, 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 way down the food chain. And that's a big challenge. And one of the challenges in some manufacturing. So food lots, again, we're trying to capture it at the point every place we use it and make sure that association intact. And again, the strength of the ERP is, can I query on a lot number and have it show me every product that lot went into, and moreover, everybody that bought that lot. And I've actually seen some of the food systems that know about recalls, which means you can do a mail merge off of a recall. So they're prepared for that. So not all applications are so prepared to do recall mass mailings. Hey, we got a recall. It impacts all of these people that bought this product. So they have automation in a lot of the food applications. In the medical devices, and just to get into an example, again, one of the challenges, you look at consuming serialized components. And if we're doing bulk manufacturing, and you have to look at your ERP, meaning, hey, I'm making 10 of these, and each product has 4 serialized components. Well, did I get those 4? Does this product with this serial know that those 4 serials are in there, or does it get all mixed up? And there's even some orchestration with how you do production, meaning, are you writing MOs for quantity 1? You're like, okay, well, but how do I make sure I get those 4 serials to this finished good? So there are some nuances to make sure you get the correct associations, first of all. And that's just the data. Well, once the data is right, again, we go back to these search features. But to take it a little further, standard ERPs don't always bill. And I've got one example where, you're thinking about the patient. Oh, Well, where do we capture the patient? I'm a medical device manufacturer, all those things. I got lots on the metals that are being consumed into this piece of material that's going to replace your spinal cord. Okay, well, how do I trace that and who got this one? So we've done augmentation even in this one context. I won't name names, but where we capture the hospital, the physician, and the patient at a line item level along with the product. The product's got a serial number. Within the serial number on that spinal cord replacement part, wow, we can chase through lots of materials, et cetera, et cetera. But that visibility and the completeness of that visibility is really the compliance. And think, as the other people on the panel will talk, is you're not going to get business from certain contracts if you can't maintain that compliance. I know Tom comes from a place that's huge. He can probably speak even more depth about medical devices. But as you get into those nuances, I mean, that's part of it. And again, serial lot. Okay, I heard that question. Can I track a serial number and a lot number? Well, not all ERPs will let you do that. They'll give you an either or. Well, what if I need serials and lots? Okay, well, I got a lot of material and there's serials within the lot. So there is some complexity that can show up depending on industry and depending on the types of materials or products that incorporating in that. So anyway, I can stop there. There's a lot more I can say. I think that's a good context.
So, Chris, I am going to have one follow-up sort of question for you. And one of the things that most companies don't realize how much overhead it is going to be just because you are going your lot or serial number processes. Sometimes, people tend to think that, okay, this is going to be a marketing play. We got a lot number. We got a serial number on our product. Okay, how cool is that? And then they realize, okay, no, now I have to assign the serial number every time when I'm scanning the product. And let's say if I'm getting 1 million product, okay, these would be like a penny, for the product. That's how small that could be. And now you have the serial number associated with this. Now, you didn't have any reason why you want to have the serial number. You simply assigned it. Now you're realizing how complex it is. So I don't know whether you have seen the similar scenarios, but in my mind, I think product cost plays an important role whether you want to have serial number.
It does. And even the receiving process, where now we incorporate QR codes, 2D barcodes, so that I've got a box that's got 50 items in there and they're all serials. I don't have to scan each one. I can do a QR, and I've now incorporated all those serials into my system, or an ASN from a vendor might incorporate all the serials as part of that. But then we've got one caveat for a company that manufactures dental equipment where they're getting finished goods, but the finished good travels with all the serials of all the components in the finished good. And you're thinking, holy cow, that's a 2-level deep receiving process. That's custom, right? Most systems aren't going to, they'll scan the serial on the finished good, but what about the subcomponents? So this is custom nuance. And why is that imperative? Is again, warranty, replacement, what is it serviceable? But you said the key word, scanning. The world of serials and lots to manually be doing it, boy, there's a problem because you need the efficiency. You heard me say a 2D barcode. There's 1 million serials in that container. Can I scan them all? Can I get an ASN with all electronically? So you've got to find efficiency, but you need the accuracy. Otherwise, you won't get the compliance. You won't win the contract. But it is labor intensive, but that's why you got to go to scanning. And again, you really have to tear apart your business process to make sure that you're able to capture correctly. So that articulation of what's that stream of flow and how do I do capture so that I make sure that we're not commingling or, hey, we're sloppy. I don't know. I thought that lot number went here. Who cares? It's a big deal. So it's not easy, but it is a requirement. But if you have the systems to meet the requirement and you get the right automation like the 2D barcodes and stuff, you can compete for business.
Okay, amazing insight there. Thank you for that. So Abu, I am you. And from your perspective, I don't know if you're going to have any other context that you might add when companies think about serial number versus lot numbers and anything that they should be thinking about when they are implementing the product traceability process. Abu, over to you.
Absolutely. So, lot numbers are generally when you're producing a batch of goods.
Yeah.
You want to trace based on batches, based on the same day production. And serial numbers would be when you want to go to the individual item level traceability, right? So a bag of peanuts is going to be different than a computer hardware, right? So with computer hardware, it is each individual item that you're tracing. So that's where typically the serial number rather than the lot number for the end product. So that's where, so generally in the food, in the pharmaceuticals, in the chemicals industry, it's lot number traceability. And more in hardware side, electronic goods, probably these contracts, it will be more serial number traceability, depending on what you're using. So again, chemicals, food tend to be lot, like manufactured hard goods tend to be serial numbers. So traceability is an important concept. So generally, most industry would have one step forward and one step backward trace. So you are getting a raw material from one vendor, which may be getting 5 other raw materials from their vendors and so on, right? It you companies by the time you enter the source raw material. So especially in the, for example, in the cannabis world, they want seed, what you're consuming traceability. So what they require is one step forward, one step backward. So you must know which customer you have sent the product to, and you must know where you bought that individual raw material from. So that's an important concept. And again, sounds easy, but even at that level, it can be hard to maintain. The biggest problem that I see which comes in is, obviously the systems have to be, right? So your ERP system must be able to support that traceability. So forward traceability, so you're looking at a component and see which work order that was used, right? Where it ended up. Or you do a backward, this is a finished good, this is a lot number, and can you trace it back down to the first raw material. Most companies do not have a regular testing process to make sure they can trace the product, right? They have the IT systems in place, they're tracking the numbers, but very few, even in the food industry, would have an actual mock recall process. I mean, larger companies tend to do it, but in the mid-sized sector, it always gets put back on the back burner. The other key issue that I see, especially in the food industry, is you're tracing it, but if the shop floor guy is going out, he's in a rush to produce the orders. He said he's using lot A, but is he actually using lot A, right? Or his supervisor asked him to bring a bag of peanuts to be used, and you ask him to bring lot A. He goes to the rack, finds the bag in front, picks it up, and goes back into his lot A, right? So those sort of things at that runtime operational level, doing the record keeping, even entering the right data into the system, tends to be harder, or keeping track of. Barcoding, scanning definitely helps, but still, in the rush of things, still people make a lot of mistakes, right? So that having that process, that consciousness around making sure the right data is captured is extremely important. And sometimes in the operational level, people tend to overlook it, and there are not enough controls in place to enforce that compliance day over day, which causes companies.
So you have some very interesting layers there, okay? And this is the problem that I have seen personally as well, where when you are going to go to shop floor, things are all over the place and you just don't know how to maintain that traceability. In fact, when you look at from the ERP processes perspective, typically the lots are probably going to be assigned when you are going to be receiving your finished goods in the inventory. So you sort of have the loose correlation between the production order that you have released on the production floor and when you are going to receive the inventory, you sort of are assigning. But when things are good, let's say if you're releasing 1,000 job orders all together on the production floor, and they are going through many different steps, there could be a bottleneck where things might get mixed as well. So from your perspective, when you are looking at these shop floor processes to be able to create the best practices so that these lots don't get mixed, have you seen anything from the system perspective or maybe from the process perspective, Abu, that can be done so that these lots don't get mixed?
So there are two ways to do it. When you release a work order, you assign the lot number, right? So that's one way. The other way is when you're actually creating the product, when you're receiving the product, that's when you assign the lot number. In my experience, what I found is when you're receiving the product, and that's where when you're creating the lot number, that probably leads to fewer mistakes rather than when you have created the lot number upfront, right? So again, depending on lot number methodology, for example, some companies would do it based on year, month, and day, right? So everything that got produced on 21st May, June 2022 gets a lot number, right? But guess what? You have a work order, you already assigned a lot number, but that work order gets delayed. Now you have to go back in and change the lot number. So that always causes some issues. In my opinion, it's always when you're actually doing the creation of the lot and you're assigning a lot number, that makes it less complex from a process point of view. And having controls around it, having that double check around it, right? One person is creating the data, there's a supervisor checking the data. That sort of process always helps in ensuring that they are into.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for those insights, Abu. Tom, so in your industry, obviously, the lot number is going to be far more critical, and we don't really have luxury of mixing the lot numbers on the shop floor that other industries, if you're in food or whatever, sometimes it's okay. It's not going to be end of the world. That's how most companies deal with it. So, and by the way, see the definition that Abu mentioned overall from the lot and serial number perspective, in my mind, that's a very Wikipedia, definition. Typically, there's going to be a significant judgment involved in terms of when to use lot number, when to use serial number. and that is going to have the overhead on your operational processes. So from your perspective, when you're deciding whether to use lot number, whether to use serial number, what are some of the things that you have employed when you're working in the industries that you have worked in? Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Sam. No, a lot of good comments by Chris and Abu already. And in terms of choosing between lot or serial number for your numbering strategy, I certainly fundamentally agree with Abu's comment that lots tend to be, I would say, less divisible situations, right? Where you have a container of a liquid, or you have some less easily divisible input into your manufacturing process. And Abu mentioned, periods of time as well, a day, it could be a shift that determines the size of the lot, the length of time that we're spend. But I think it's also the raw materials and inputs. Certainly, in the pharma world, you'd have different lots based not just on time of day or date and time, but also, those inputs. If you run out of a particular ingredient in most food or drug processes, you cannot go and take another different raw material input, maybe from another vendor or from another date from the same vendor, and say, oh, I'm just continuing that production order with this input now. No, that finished good lot has to be closed out, and you have to be working on a new lot in terms of a finished good with that new input. Even if it were the same day and the same shift, and all that, you'd need to be able to distinguish that. But typically, in my experience, it's a question of divisibility. I think Abu used the example of a computer, or maybe it was Chris, I can't remember now. But yes, when you have items that are very easily divided into the smallest unit, one, then serialization makes a lot more sense. Sometimes people use the expression a lot of one for a serial number. That's a lot of one. So I tend to use that as a general guide, things that are difficult to divide up. Now, interestingly, I came across a company called Egg Fusion recently. I don't know if anybody's heard of these guys, but they actually provide laser etching onto the shells of eggs. So typically, eggs would be a batch or a lot managed item, right? But these guys with this technology are using it in the packaging process. As eggs are coming down the line and then getting put into boxes, they're etching a serial number onto the egg itself, onto the shell, in a way that would enable that item, which historically would be lot managed, to actually be serialized and serial number managed down to the individual egg. Now, that may sound like overkill, but eggs are a common source of health issues and sometimes recalls. So that's not, if it's reasonably inexpensive, that is not a ridiculous thought. In terms of the scope of your recall, obviously, if you're managing in bigger groups of units, a lot, as opposed to serial number individual units, you might end up having to recall more product because you simply don't manage it in a way, even though maybe, as Chris was saying, you manage it very well, but the management is in big buckets. So you're going to have to recall the entire bucket as opposed to maybe a very targeted recall, right? Where you'd be managing at an individual item serialized level. So anyway, those are a couple of thoughts around strategy. Do you go with lots or serial numbers? I mean, there's a lot in this topic, Sam, that we could talk about, all day for weeks probably, in terms of not just the strategy, choosing lots versus serial numbers, but then what's the approach to applying or affixing a number, the strategy, to the product or the object, right? Is it going to be etched, like this laser technology at Fusion? Is it going to be a label that's affixed to it with a serial number or a QR code, as Chris mentioned a couple times? And is it going to be an RFID tag? I did some work on RFID tags for a while when I was a consultant. And there's all kinds of technologies that could be used for identifying the product, strategy, and then the technology of affixing or attaching that identifier. And then, you have to be able to read it. We talked a little bit about scanning. One of the things that was very popular for a while, and I don't think RFID ever really fully took off, but, some companies have embraced it. I think McDonald's is using it. Sainsbury's in the UK is using it. I think Walmart is making some use of it, but it never really got the traction people expected. Nonetheless, it allows you through radio frequency to be reading barcodes in mass. Like there are portal technologies, right? You could have at your gate of your, the dock of your warehouse as products coming in or leaving, and you have a portal and you wheel the pallet through. The RFID tags can be read en masse, and that data captured, even though you don't have line of sight. The pallet's already assembled. So those are really interesting technologies. You have to make decisions on that front, and all of that is very techy, right? Then you get to, like, what about the business process? Like, to your point, Sam, receiving, shipping. When do I even introduce this? One of the interesting topics that came up on one of the projects I was on when we were designing the ERP solution, there was initially an assumption that, hey, at the time we take the order from the customer, we're using batch management or lot management in this particular case. So we're going to have that switched on, and we're going to assign the batch to the items that, to the quantity that we're going to give to this customer. And it kind of echoes some of what Abu was saying about, maybe you don't want to do it as early as possible. Maybe you'd rather do it almost as late as possible to introduce things like this. So they found that by introducing it at the sales order process, right, if there were a discrepancy in the inventory and that lot, they didn't have the full amount that they thought they would have when they created the order, that would be an issue, right? And the order would have to be reworked. Or if, the material got scrapped in between the time the order was taken and the lot numbers assigned to that particular customer's line item and when it was being picked, again, that's a problem, right? So typically in good business processes I've seen, you might take the order without batch management, but when you go and pick it and get ready to ship it, that's when you want to be identifying the batch that's going to be associated with that order that goes out to that customer, and so on. So again, there's process strategies about timing as to when do you actually introduce this, just like on the receiving end, as Abu was talking about, on the shipping side as well. And again, I could go on and on too, like all of us, I think, but these are interesting topics. Maybe the last thing I'll just add, Sam, is when I was doing a little prep for this call, I was wondering how many recalls are there going on out there in the United States, and who's driving it? And I said, okay, there are 3 agencies involved in recalls. There's the FDA for pharmaceuticals. There's the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, for food, and there is what's it called? The CPSC, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, for other products. And I thought, 10, 20, 50, 100, I don't know. And it was for the USDA, 120 is the average number of product recalls for food in the U.S. per year. 300 recalls by the CPSC issued per year, and 1,200 issued by the FDA per year. And these are the mandatory recalls. These aren't even the voluntary recalls that companies are doing to get out ahead of problems before the hammer comes down. So there are thousands of recalls happening. So although people tend to think of this as a infrequent process, it ain't as infrequent as you think.
Yeah, so some very interesting commentary as well as the story. So I am going to have just brief question for you, and that is going to be about your egg story. And I probably want input from everyone, if they think that, that should have lot and things. So typically in my mind, when I think of lot versus serial number is going to be something that requires some steps afterwards, meaning if it is going to be either it is going to have some sort of warranty or it requires you to identify that product. For example, let's say if we talk about laptops are so different that you have to have the history of that laptop. If you don't have that, you cannot fix it. I cannot assume that whatever is happening in Chuck's laptop is also true for my laptop. That's why the serial number is really important. Now, hold on a second here, okay? So now egg is actually getting a serial number. So what are we doing with it? Okay, if you are doing the recall, then you can recall based on your lot number. So why are we printing serial number again on the egg? Tom?
Oh, well, I think it's in order to simply have a more fine control of the what's out there. Again, I'm not advocating for it. I was just saying I came across this recently and said it was a fascinating deviation from what I think of as the general rule, right, of divisibility. I didn't think of eggs as easily divisible, in terms of management. Like you can't typically really put a serial number on an egg. When you think about it, you wouldn't think that that's even reasonable. But these guys found a way. I was only saying that there are people who are looking at this question, the strategy question of is it divisible? I think you raised a question of, Sam, is it necessary? Even if it's possible, is it necessary? And I wasn't trying to address that. I was just saying, hey, there are people who are changing the game a little bit, where you might have historically thought, I can't manage this at a serial number level. It's just not possible. And people are introducing technologies that may render that assumption no longer valid. So again, should you? Is it really necessary? I'm not in the egg industry, so I don't know. I don't know what's really driving that need, but it was an interesting technology shift. That was my point.
It's definitely interesting, and I'll add some more colors there just to build on that. So I have seen this happening in the pharma industry, and in the pharma industry, you require the manufacturing serial number along with lot number that Chris was trying to mention, because they have to have the end-to-end serializability, or I don't know, GSCSA is the organization that mandates that you have to have the manufacturer serial number printed on each pill that you are consuming. I don't know if they have introduced that in the agriculture as well. That could be the reason why they are doing this for eggs. But very, very, very interesting. Thank you so much, Sam. Okay, Andy, so coming to you, from your perspective, whatever you have seen, lot versus serial number, and the processes in your industry.
Well, everyone's been making some very interesting comments. There was talk about Chris in the electronics business, and that sometimes they call that configuration management, because commonly the lot number is the receiving lot from your vendor, and then steel or an electronic component or whatever else, you're able to trace it all the way through your production facility out to the customer site for recalls or any kind of challenge. Versus a serial number, which is usually identified on one specific item. So there could be a lot of 10 things, each one having its own individual serial number. And configuration management means that in that electronics device, not only is the main finished product have a serial number, it also has a serial number on probably of the board or some of the components inside as well, and they're all traceable. Going further with what Chris was talking about, some systems cannot handle both lot and serial. That's very, very true. But even further, some companies need more than that. There's some companies that need steel fabricators, for example. They need a heat treat to be able, the heat treat number to be able to trace. There's certifications in all different industries to be traced. So there's all other types of components that you want to attach or have along with that lot number or serial number when you're tracing and have it available. I mentioned I'd been in the aerospace business. If you think about and the expression cradle to grave, if you think about an airplane flying overhead and a bolt shears off the airplane wing and lands in your backyard or whatever the case, they have to trace that bolt back through the manufacturing facility, back through the raw material of the steel from the vendor, so they can recall all of them, right now. And that's one of the huge benefits of that type of traceability. But I'm going to tell a little story, and I'm going to age myself and prove to Chris I've actually been in this business probably when he was a child. Now I'm going to age myself here. Does everyone remember in 1982 when we had the Tylenol scale? Okay, I got one person. I got one hand up. Okay, two hands up. Okay, well, we're all three of us are aging. This is when traceability became forefront, became all part of general pop culture, if you want to call it that. Back in 1982, this is a really sad story, actually. 7 people died because Tylenol, they didn't put those, when you buy a bottle of Tylenol, it has a lot number on it. And it has a sealed thing on when you open it up, and it has a child-proof. and all those different mechanisms to insulate the public from the product. Well, they didn't have that prior to 1982. And some crazy person decided to tamper with some of the Tylenol bottles with cyanide. I know, 7 people died. And that was the beginning of true lot traceability. And before you know it, now everyone just sees that's what a Tylenol bottle is. It's always been that way, but not true. That was 1982, and I think I was 1 year old then. Over to you, Sam.
Yeah, so some very interesting commentary. By the way, you got me on that because obviously that was the time when I was born. So obviously I'm not going to know about these things. but on that story, okay, so there's a little layer to it, and that is going to build up on what Tom was trying to say, why you need that manufacturing traceability.
Yes.
And even if you have the lot and serial number, back from 1980s, I don't think that was enough for pharma. And that's the reason why DSCSA is trying to change this. Okay, so definitely. Now
it's been an evolution.
Exactly. Right? So now what they need is they need the whole ASN. Okay, whatever is going on in the package, whoever is touching the package throughout the supply chain, you need complete data object flowing
complete raw material mixture formula of that product. Exactly.
Including cases. Okay. If anybody touches the case, if you are going to even replace the wrapper, they want to know about it because this thing could happen, and now we are living in a world. It's a crazy world. Anything could happen. So great story. Any other follow-up comments, Andy?
For you, Sam?
Yeah, please.
I always have history lessons for you.
I know. Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy. So, Chuck, I'm actually coming to you. So, from your perspective, obviously, you had a lot of different defense stories. So, I am very interested in hearing those. So, tell us, anything related to lot and serial number that you have seen. You're on mute.
Yeah. So, one of the things that the egg story actually is really fascinating to me because eggs aside, I don't know how they're going to recall half my omelet, but in the defense, there is this move to laser mark and micro laser mark each individual part. Now, this is an old thing. They began to research this, I would say, probably 15 years ago, where it became a real issue. Interestingly enough, it's the reason for the slow adoption is, one, how do you get the microstamping done? How do you do it without damaging the part? Most importantly, how do you read it? Okay, this is not the kind of thing that you can read with a conventional barcode reader, and RFID really wasn't commercialized at that point. So there's definitely some process on the input and the output that really needs to be considered. And you have this requirement. It flows down to a lot of small companies. It can really cause it. And there's a couple other things that I think about that take into account. So it's really a function oftentimes of risk. Pharmaceuticals, high risk. Defense, high risk. Airplane, high risk. Food, not as high risk, but high risk, okay? And nuclear energy, where I have some experience, extraordinarily high risk. So the higher the risk, the more likely they're going to want to reduce the traceability down to the item. Raw materials versus individuals already been discussed, okay? But the things that really jump out at me are process issues, particularly when you get into a small company, okay? So my controller's not going to be very happy with me if I get to, a fraction of a lot and I'm tossing them out because I have a 25-piece order, but I only have 16 parts, heck with it. I've got a problem. So you start getting into physical process issues where you have to separate lots, so because when it comes to traceability, a part number is not a part number. Each part number / lot number / serial number / heat number is a completely different inventoried part. Okay. Both data and physical handling. And they need to be separated, they need to be handled as such. And so oftentimes when you get that, particularly in a smaller company with less sophisticated ERP, you're going to have a problem and you're going to have to manually manipulate that, and it jacks up your cost. So you have these process issues that are really, truly crucial. And from the defense perspective, they put additional requirements on. I have received many an order with single lot manufacturing requirement, where you cannot split a lot at any level from raw material up through the finished good. And so it makes that much. Now you have two choices, right? You put in the data system, you put in the manufacturing handling process, the segregation, or I don't take your order, and nobody wants to do that. But honestly, sometimes that can be valid. And I've actually done that. And I will just add one last one that I really find, Pete, really interesting. Working in the semiconductor industry, there's actually a really good reason for traceability analysis related performance testing. So when you build semiconductors, it's not everyone performs great. They build, as you fall off the edges, some don't perform quite the same. Well, when you have an issue with one, those engineers may want to go back, find the chips or the items that are from a similar lot, so that they can use them to diagnose failure mode analysis in semiconductors. So that's long before it hits the floor. That's ensuring product conformance. Long before it hits the shipping dock. So there's so many cool process related things there that they're just all kind of rolling through my head. Thanks to
Yeah, and since you are talking about processes, I'm actually going to tell you my story, and I'm pretty sure you're going to have a story there related to the processes as well. And to be honest, I mean, I find this particular story extremely fascinating, and I always say this to my customers that what, data and systems are only going to do so much. You need this thing at the process level. You need to have very clear boundaries, and sometimes you need to accommodate that as part of your manufacturing as well as product process. So here, the story that I'm talking about, Chuck, in this particular case, they were producing needles, okay, like really sharp needles. Now you have to punch hole in the needles, and I'm like, okay, how do you do that? I don't know. I mean, you have to flow through your needles through the production process. So it's not the box that is flowing; it's the individual needle that is flowing across the machines, and that is going through the production process. They have to measure the quality. And by the way, these are medical device, because you have to measure the tolerance. So now I'm like, okay, and in this particular case, you are not supposed to be mixing the needles. It has to be the same material. You have to have the end-to-end traceability. So what they had done is they had a steel coil that they used to produce. They had to weld the needle on top of your coil, and that used to sort of flow through the entire production process. And at the end of the process, they'll take out the needle and they'll that I found really fascinating. Obviously, there are cost implications because you are literally consuming a lot more steel to produce a needle, which is probably going to require far less steel. I just find it fascinating. I don't know if you have similar stories that you might be able to.
So
in terms of.
I do have one, and it does involve a recall. And it's actually a different part of the semiconductor industry, and it's very defense related. In times of semiconductor shortages, this becomes amplified. If anybody's heard of those. So what happens is there are gray market products that are produced. There are counterfeit products that are produced. And in the defense business, they go out of their way to, make sure that you're not using counterfeit products. However, every once in a while, they end up in the supply chain because we are dealing with humans after all, not just data structure. And interestingly enough, it wasn't a recall because something failed. It was that they found out that gray market semiconductors got into the mix. And the way to do it is detective work, is process of elimination. I know all the valid numbers from all of the, non-counterfeit parts. Everything else is suspect and has to be isolated. Now they can copy those serial numbers, but the chances of them being the same, but that was actually the forensic analysis. It wasn't the typical traceability reason that we're talking about. It's say, okay, which ones have the gray market so I don't have to pay for these things? They didn't meet their contract obligation. I want all my money back, and you're probably not going to be subject to a contract anytime soon. It's a commerce and it was real. And honestly, company went out of business.
Love that story. Thank you so much, Chuck, for that. Chris, I'm coming to you. Any comments over comments or any other stories that you might be able to? Chris, over to you. You are on mute, Chris, if you are talking. It's still on mute, sorry.
Again, some good perspectives on the trace. And I think as you look at the efficiency and ROI, right? And do we do it for just the purposes? Usability. So I always come back to that, where a lot of people say, oh, you way to capture this. But I think as you vet the systems and the capability, and again, by industry, right? Is it usable? What's the capture method? How's the trace work? Who am I trying to support that with? And I think one comment we didn't make about quality process, if we're doing lot trace and we're doing some of these things, is there a quality process that helps us kind of catch some of the problems that may be coming down the path? But, as we just look at systems technology and how well do they work from a trace, I mean, that's one of the things that I continue to dig into as we look at the requirements for the customer to support their, And again, did I have another story for you? I thought I did. We've got a human tissue manufacturer. Oops. That's an interesting one, isn't it? And you're like, okay, where did that go? And you think about, where do I write that? Where's that serial number at? Where's that traceability on? So now we enter in a world of complexity to the nth degree. Now we're not just talking about foods or electronics or medical devices. We're talking about a material that's going to go into your body. And so the scrutiny on these guys is you look at the data they have to collect, and this is where standard out-of-the-box ERP, and I heard heat numbers, and a lot of times a heat number travels as a lot attribute. Maybe it needs to be separate, but as we get into the tissue space with these guys, again, there's so much more traceability that even comes from that. Back to, you're thinking lot numbers, now we go back to donors, and we've got all kinds of stuff like that. But another story I have with another client that does actually glass extrusion. And so they're making the real thin little bitty glass that goes into IV bottles. And one of the things we talk about lot mixing, and these folks actually mix multiple lots in a batch. And that's an interesting topic as you bring up, as you think about this, single batch, single production run, meaning, from a best practices standpoint, should they have 5 lots in one production batch? I think that gets vague, and that could actually get more compromising as opposed to the segmentation, meaning, hey, if we've only got enough material in this lot, do you break your work order and say, I made 50 pieces this lot, 75 pieces this lot, versus me saying, hey, I made 125 and I have no idea what lots and what products. And I think that's another best practice as we have this conversation. I look at how they're operating their, but it goes back to cost, and it goes back to manufacturing operation. And can they stop the operation if they're extruding glass, and can they do small runs, or do they have to get into consuming lots of lots in a single batch? And again, now we're going to go back to by industry. I think in foods, is it common practice to incorporate multiple lot numbers in a single batch of food? Gets interesting. They have multiple lots into a single batch of extruded glass, same type of thing. Back to Tom's comment about serialized eggs. How does that magnify the recall or minimize the recall, or is it, how do you know that that was the egg that caused the contamination? And then you go back to what I said about quality and testing. Do you really have any data to say, oh, it's that one egg, but you put 1,000 eggs in the batch? Again, and I think that rationalizing, for the audience here is, what is the best practice? How much should you track? Should you track cereals on every component? Can you capture it? Can you consume it? Can you find it? And again, I think we'll have more closing comments about that. But I think that as we look at by industry, again, you heard me talk about glass, human tissue. And again, where's it make the most sense? And again, do we have to segment lots into production runs so that we don't commingle? Again, it's a by industry comment.
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. Abu, I'm coming to you. And any comments over comments, any stories? And you're on mute as well, Abu. And I don't know if it is because of the delay of his StreamYard. I believe so.
No, I'm on mute. So we have talked about lots and serial numbers, and especially in the pharmaceuticals and again the cannabis world, you have to sometimes track multiple aspects, right? So you have lot numbers, and then you have potency, for example. It's true for pharmaceuticals, it's true for the cannabis world, and that potencies, they can change, right? So you create a lot. Now you have a potency, for example, for 7.3%. For the same product, you're doing manufacturing the same thing, you can have a 7.4% or 7.35%. So you have to track that traceability individually and separately. One story that I have is, I was involved in oil and gas industry, and they tried to implement traceability. So we have talked a lot about heat numbers over here. And what they had was they sold pipes, line pipes for oil and gas drilling or transmission. And they want to track heat numbers. But, the way the pipes are stored is a certain length. So you have 100, 10 meter, 20 meter, 30 meter length, and it's stored in a big pile on a large piece of ground, right? You can't put a 10-meter pipe into a rack or something. And you get all of that, and it gets commingled, right? It's a big rack. You cannot control which heat number pipe is with which spot on the rack. So, and then when you're going to sell that pipe, you cannot track each and every heat number while you're doing the sales order or you're doing the inventory movement, because the heat number can be on top, it can be at the very end of the pipe, it can be at the beginning. 3 pipes can be on top of each other, and you can't spot the heat number. You can bring in all the scanning technologies, they cannot still scan the heat number. And what happened at the end is that pipe goes into the ground, it gets corroded, it gets cut off, it gets welded. So they tried to implement it in that industry, then they gave it up, right? So it's too complex to measure it. One other thing we have done is we've talked a lot about the internal processes, right? But one thing that's really important is the external processes. You have a product recall, especially in the food industry. Now what? So it can involve your marketing department, how to do a public relations item.
Yeah.
What sort of, processes you have internally to investigate it. How do you contact the customers, right? If you do not have the tools in place, people are even designing a letterhead, How do we inform the customer? Do we need legal to review this letter before it goes out or not, right? So you don't want to be doing those things at the end. A lot of people think about internal processes, but external processes when something does go wrong are quite important.
Yeah, could not agree more. Thank you so much, Abu, for that. So, Tom, any comments over comments? Any stories?
A couple of maybe quick things. One, some of what a couple of different panelists have said echoed with me on things like the level of serialization. I worked as in the IT shop at Varian, where there was a lot of discussion around surely the finished goods, what was sold to the customer would be serialized, and then the levels, with thousands of parts going into these machines that were being sold to hospitals and clinics, and down to screws and bolts, nuts, and the question came up, how do we serialize everything? Is it like the airline industry? And the conclusion was no. And then if you say no, then you say, well, then where do you draw the line? Saying yes, it would be easy. Saying no makes this a much more complex and controversial topic. And so, for example, people got into the, agreed any subcomponent that is potentially what they would call a field replaceable unit should be serialized. If we're going to have field service engineers go out and swap out parts and do repairs, then that needs to be a serialized item, even though it's not a finished good that we sell typically. So there's a whole strategy, I think, around the levels of serialization, and it comes down to business process again, coming back to what Chuck was talking about. So that was one example where the strategy of serialization that was embraced had a much deeper challenge, where we said, at what level do you stop? What's necessary? What's going to help our business? And so that's one story. Like Chuck, one of the companies I was once a consultant to, but that was producing NIC cards, network interface cards, that were serialized. They found the black market or gray market issue to be a great use case, where they had all of their data and customers were returning NIC cards that they had bought not from the vendor, the actual manufacturer. They had bought from somebody else on the black or the gray market. And then they said, we don't need them anymore, or they're, maybe some were defective and we want to return these. And they tried to return them to the true manufacturer. And when the serial numbers were reviewed, it was clear that this customer had not been buying these from the real supplier of these products. So that was a very interesting use case, similar to what Chuck was talking about. And I thought, again, Abu was talking about the external processes, and I totally agree. That needs to be thought through. Once you identify the need for a recall, how do you execute? But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the ERP and IT stuff as well, like the internal processes. So one of the questions I think you had asked us as a group, Sam, as we were getting ready for this was, how do you even manage this in a warehouse or on, in the manufacturing process as you're staging product and storing product? And one of the things that I was involved in on several projects was in the ERP system, making sure that the goods receipt process took a lot number or batch number from vendors into account. So when we would develop an automated put away strategy from the dock to the bins in the warehouse, you might already have product XYZ in a bin, and it's only occupying half of the bin space. So logically, if it were more of product XYZ, a couple more cartons, you might say, well, we'll put it right in that same bin because it's all XYZ. But in fact, it's two different lots. So if you have the intelligence and the capability to put the strategy, that automated put away strategy together or in place, you can direct the material so that it says, oh no, I think as I don't know if it was Abu or Chris was saying, that's a completely different product. It's not the same as XYZ in the bin that we have already. This is XYZ that needs to go someplace else. It needs to be segregated. So just the management of the product, the lots, is critically important. and you can embrace it and build it into your business processes and accept that this is the cost of doing business, but hopefully you can minimize that cost and you can automate a lot of that. So whether it's the scanning at time of issue or it's at time of receipt, you can leverage that information to optimize your processes.
Okay, amazing insight. Thank you so much, Tom. So, Andy, we are super tight on time. Any super short comments? You're on mute as well.
I see that. Well, no, I mean, everybody's covered the topic very well. I mean, the whole, like what Chris was saying, the whole purpose or what companies are forced to do traceability are usually regulatory compliant, but of course, recalls, electronics, equipment, all those kinds of companies. But you really have to look at the ROI on the effort, because there is a lot of effort, and see if it justifies the potential business you're gaining.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Andy. Chuck, super short comments. You're on mute.
Super short. Imagine the day when the Star Trek technology exists where you can scan an item and you can tell every Tylenol pill has an individual personality, an individual signature. Combine that with blockchain. Wow, we're going to be having a different conversation. Here's a punchline. That exists today, and I know where to find it.
Okay, amazing. And typically we do the closing advice. So Chuck, I am going to let you do closing advice for everybody today. Do you have any closing advice for our listeners?
The higher the risk, the more you need to take this seriously. Straight up. Do not go into your industry and target your market. If it's high risk, man, take it serious from minute one.
Love it. Thank you so much, Chuck. On that note, thank you so much for joining, everyone. That's it for today. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our digital transformation series for which we meet every Thursday. So make sure you guys are going to be here next week. We are going to come back with another topic. On that note, thanks everyone for tuning in tonight.
Thanks everybody. Good seeing you all.
See you. Good night.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Abu Asif, head over to pennymanagement.com. It's PANNIMANAGEMENT.com. If you want to learn more about Chris Garadini or Chuck Coxhead, head over to turnkeytech.com. It's turnkeytec.com. If you want to learn more about Tom Rodden, follow and connect with him on LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about Andy Pratico, head over to essoft.com. It's ESSOFT.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Thomas Clymer, who shares his insights into the automated testing for ERP. Also, the interview with Richard Labobis, who shares his insights into procurement prioritization and its impact on scheduling and inventory. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.